The kitchen smelled of burnt toast and regret. I sat at the wobbly table, my hands trembling as I unfolded the birthday card Daniel had given me an hour ago. Happy 70th, Dad. It read in his hurried scrawl, the words as hollow as the smile he'd flashed before storming out. The card was cheap, the kind you grab at a gas station when you've forgotten something important. It stung, but not as much as the red mark still pulsing on my cheek. My only son had slapped me. On my birthday. Over $500 in rent he hadn't paid in months. I'd raised Daniel alone after his mother left us when he was 6. Back then, he was a bright-eyed kid who'd cling to my hand during thunderstorms, promising he'd take care of me when I got old. I worked double shifts at the factory, skipping meals to save for his college fund, cheering at every soccer game, even when he missed the goal. I thought we were a team. But somewhere along the way, Daniel changed. Success got to him his tech job, his flashy car, his life in the city where he played the part of a big shot. I was proud, but I missed the boy who'd once made me paper crowns for my birthday. When the factory closed 5 years ago, my savings dwindled. Social Security barely covered the bills, so I rented out the spare room in my apartment. Daniel, now 35 and always between projects, asked to move back in last year. I said yes, thinking it'd be like old times. But he treated the place like a hotel, coming and going without a word, leaving dishes in the sink and rent unpaid. I let it slide for months, not wanting to push him away. But today, on my 70th birthday, I'd had enough. I asked for the rent gently, I thought. His response was a flash of anger, a raised hand, and a slap that echoed louder than any words. I touched my cheek, the sting fading but the shock lingering. The apartment was quiet now, save for the hum of the fridge and the distant wail of a siren outside. I wondered where I'd gone wrong. Had I been too soft, too forgiving? Or had the world hardened Daniel in ways I couldn't reach? I didn't know about the security camera in the hallway, the one the landlord installed last month. I didn't know it had caught everything: his raised voice, my plea, the slap. I didn't know it would spread across the internet by morning, a viral video that would unravel my son's life. The next day, my phone buzzed relentlessly. Neighbors, old friends, even a reporter from the local news station. Mr. Thompson, have you seen the video? They asked. I hadn't. I didn't own a smartphone, just an old flip phone that barely held a charge. Mrs. Carter from across the hall came over, her eyes wide as she showed me her screen. There it was, grainy footage of Daniel yelling, his hand striking my face, me stumbling back. The caption read, Tech exec assaults elderly father over rent dispute. My stomach churned. I didn't want Daniel's name dragged through the mud. But the internet didn't care about my wishes. By noon, the video had millions of views. Hashtags like Justice for Mr. Thompson and Cancel Daniel trended on platforms I didn't understand. People called him a monster, a spoiled brat, a disgrace. I wanted to defend him, to say he wasn't always like this, but the words caught in my throat. I remembered the boy who'd once drawn me a picture of us fishing together, his smile as wide as the river. Where was that boy now? Daniel called that afternoon, his voice frantic. Dad, I'm sorry. Okay. I didn't mean it. You have to tell them it was a mistake. I listened, my heart heavy. He didn't ask how I was. Didn't mention the bruise or the birthday card still sitting on the table. He was scared, not for me, but for himself. His company had seen the video. They were reviewing his position. I wanted to comfort him, but the ache in my chest held me back. I told him to come home so we could talk. He hung up without a reply. That night, I sat alone again, the apartment feeling smaller than ever. I thought about the years I'd spent teaching Daniel right from wrong. The nights I'd stayed up worrying when he missed curfew. The pride I'd felt when he landed his first big job. Had I failed him? Or had he failed me? The world was watching now, judging us both. But they didn't know our story. They didn't know about the time he fixed my old radio with a paperclip or how he'd cried when we buried his goldfish. They only saw the slap, the anger, the moment that defined him now. I didn't sleep. The phone kept ringing, and the news vans parked outside my building. I pulled the curtains shut, but the weight of their stares pressed through the walls. I wondered what Daniel was doing, if he was alone too, scrolling through the hate piling up online. I wanted to fix this, to protect him like I always had, but I didn't know how. The video had taken on a life of its own, and I was just an old man caught in its wake. The morning after the video went viral, my apartment felt like a cage. The phone rang until I unplugged it, but the knocks on my door didn't stop. Reporters, neighbors, even strangers who'd seen the video online wanted my side of the story. I didn't open the door. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the birthday card, its edges curling like my resolve. Daniel hadn't come home. I hadn't heard from him since his panic call yesterday. The silence was louder than the slap. Mrs. Carter slipped a note under my door, offering to bring me groceries so I wouldn't have to face the cameras outside. She'd always been kind, but I couldn't bear the pity in her eyes. I wrote a quick thank you and slid it back, then turned on the radio to drown out the world. A talk show host was discussing the video, calling Daniel a symptom of a generation that disrespects its elders. I switched it off. They didn't know him. They didn't know us. By afternoon, the story had grown legs. A news site published an article, Techstars Fall, How One Slap Ended a Career. It said Daniel's company had suspended him pending an investigation. His LinkedIn profile, once polished with buzzwords like innovator and leader, was now flooded with comments calling him a bully. I pictured him reading them, his jaw tight, his pride crumbling. I wanted to hate him for what he'd done, but all I felt was a hollow ache. He was still my son. I finally ventured out to the corner store, pulling my cap low to avoid recognition. The clerk, a young man who usually greeted me with a smile, looked away as he rang up my milk and bread. Tough week. Huh, Mr. Thompson, he mumbled. I nodded, too tired to explain. On my way back, I passed a group of teenagers watching the video on a phone, their laughter cutting through the air. What kind of guy hits his own dad? One said. I hurried past, my face burning. When I got home, there was a voicemail from a lawyer. She said I could sue Daniel for assault, that I had a strong case. The idea made my stomach turn. Sue my own son. I deleted the message. But the thought lingered. Maybe he needed consequences. Something to shake him awake. I'd always shielded him, paid his parking tickets, covered his rent when he was short, told myself he'd grow out of his selfishness. Maybe I'd been wrong. That evening, Daniel showed up. He looked like he hadn't slept. His shirt wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. Dad, he started, standing in the doorway. I messed up. I know. But you can't let this ruin me. He paced the small living room, talking about his job, his reputation, how he'd worked too hard to lose it all. I waited for him to ask about me, about the bruise, about how I'd spent my birthday hiding from the world. He didn't. Daniel, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Why did you do it? He stopped pacing, his face twisting like he'd been caught. I was stressed. Okay. You kept pushing about the rent, and I just snapped. He looked at the floor, not at me. You don't get it. Dad, I've got loans, bills, a life to maintain. I can't just, he cut himself off. But I heard the unspoken words, I can't be like you. I wanted to tell him about the nights I'd gone hungry so he could eat. The years I'd worked my hands raw for him. But I didn't. Instead, I asked, what do you want me to do? He looked up, hopeful. Tell them it wasn't a big deal. Make a statement. Say we're good. I stared at him. The boy I'd raised, now a stranger begging for a lifeline. I wanted to say yes. To fix it like always. But something in me broke. I need time, I said. He left without another word. That night, I dreamed of Daniel as a child, laughing as we built a fort out of couch cushions. In the dream, he looked at me with trust, not anger. I woke with tears on my face. The apartment dark and empty. The world was tearing my son apart, and I didn't know if I should save him or let him fall. Maybe he needed to hit bottom to find himself again. Maybe I did too. The days blurred into a haze of noise and guilt. The video was everywhere: news channels, social media, even a late-night talk show that turned it into a punchline. My apartment became a fortress. The curtains always drawn. The phone unplugged. I stopped going to the senior center, too ashamed to face the whispers. Mrs. Carter brought me casseroles. Her kindness a quiet anchor. But even she couldn't pull me out of the storm in my head. I kept replaying Daniel's slap. His words. His desperation. I kept asking myself what I'd done to make him hate me. A week after the incident, a reporter from a national outlet tracked me down. She was young, polished, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mr. Thompson, the world wants to hear from you, she said through the door. You're a victim. Don't you want justice? I didn't open the door. Justice. The word felt wrong, like a shoe that didn't fit. I didn't want Daniel in jail or his life destroyed. I wanted my son back, the one who'd once promised to take care of me. I turned on the TV. A mistake. A pundit was dissecting Daniel's life, pulling up old photos from his social media, him at a tech conference, grinning with a drink in hand, him posing by his car, all sleek lines and pride. This is a man who had everything, the pundit said, and threw it away in a moment of rage. I switched it off, my hands shaking. They didn't know about the nights he'd helped me with math homework, his patience endless, or how he'd saved his allowance to buy me a tie for Father's Day. They only saw the monster in the video. Daniel texted me late that night, I'm fired. Thanks for nothing. The words hit like another slap. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button. I wanted to say I was sorry, that I hadn't meant for this to happen. But I couldn't. He'd crossed a line, and I was tired of pretending he hadn't. I typed, come talk to me, and hit send. No response. The next morning, I found an envelope under my door. Inside was a check for $2,000 back rent. I assumed Dan a note in Daniel's handwriting. I'm leaving town. Don't look for me. My knees buckled. I sank to the floor, the check crumpling in my hand. He was running, just like his mother had. I'd lost her to her own demons, and now I was losing him to his. I wanted to chase him, to drag him back and make him face this. But I didn't know where to start. Mrs. Carter found me there, still on the floor. She didn't ask questions, just helped me to the couch and made tea. You can't carry his choices, Henry, she said, her voice soft but firm. You gave him everything. What he did with it, hats on him. I nodded, but her words didn't fill the hole in my chest. I kept seeing Daniel's face, not the angry man in the video, but the boy who'd once looked at me like I was his hero. That afternoon, I forced myself to go outside. The news vans were gone, but the stairs remained. At the park, I sat on a bench, watching families laugh and play. A young father chased his daughter, her giggles rising like music. I envied him. I'd had those moments with Daniel, but they felt like another lifetime. I wondered if he was okay, if he was safe, if he hated me. I wondered if I'd ever see him again. When I got home, there was an email from a local charity. They'd seen the video and wanted to start a fundraiser in my name for elderly tenants struggling with rent. They called me an inspiration. I didn't feel like one. I felt like a father who'd lost his son, a man whose private pain had become public entertainment. But I agreed to meet them. Maybe helping others would ease the ache. Maybe it would give me a reason to keep going. The charity meeting was held in a community center that smelled of coffee and old books. I sat at a folding table, surrounded by people who called me brave and resilient. Their words felt like ash. I wasn't brave, I was broken. But I listened as they outlined their plan, a fundraiser to help seniors like me cover rent, with my story as the centerpiece. They showed me a poster with my face, taken from a news clip, under the words, "Support our elders." I wanted to shrink away, but I nodded. If my pain could help someone else, maybe it wasn't all for nothing. Back home, I found myself sorting through old photos, a box I hadn't touched in years. There was Daniel at 8, gap-toothed and grinning at the zoo. At 16, awkward in a suit for prom. At 25, shaking hands at his college graduation. Each picture was a stab, a reminder of the years before he'd grown distant. I wondered where he was now, if he'd found a place to land. His note, "Don't look for me," echoed in my mind. But I couldn't help it. I called his number. It went straight to voicemail. The fundraiser gained traction, and with it came more attention. A local TV station invited me for an interview. I almost said no, but Mrs. Carter convinced me. "You're not just speaking for yourself, Henry," she said. "You're speaking for all the folks who feel invisible." So I went. The host was kind, her questions gentle, but it still felt like peeling off my skin. I told her about raising Daniel, about the slap, about the video. I didn't defend him, but I didn't condemn him either. "He's my son," I said, my voice cracking. "I still love him." The interview aired that night, and the response was overwhelming. Letters poured in, some from strangers sharing their own stories of family betrayal, others offering support, a few condemning me for ruining Daniel's life. One letter stood out, a handwritten note from a woman named Ellen, whose son had cut her off years ago. "Your story gave me hope," she wrote. Not for him, but for me. To keep going. I read it again and again. Her words a lifeline. Weeks passed, and the fundraiser grew. We raised enough to help a dozen tenants avoid eviction. At the event, I met people like me, old, tired, carrying the weight of choices they couldn't control. One man, George, told me his daughter hadn't spoken to him in a decade. "You're lucky," he said, his eyes distant. "At least your boy might come back." I didn't feel lucky, but I understood. We were bound by the same quiet grief, the kind that lingers when love isn't enough. I still hadn't heard from Daniel. His social media accounts were gone, his phone disconnected. I checked the news, dreading I'd find him in trouble, but there was nothing. The world had moved on. The viral video replaced by the next scandal. But I couldn't move on. Every night, I left the porch light on, just in case. I kept his old soccer trophy on the shelf, a reminder of who he'd been. I prayed he was finding his way, even if it was far from me. One evening, as I watered the plants Mrs. Carter had given me, I found a package at my door. No note, just a small box with a new radio inside. Sleek and modern, nothing like the one Daniel had fixed as a kid. My heart leapt, then sank. Was it him? Or just a stranger's pity? I set it on the table, unopened, afraid to hope. The apartment was quiet. But for the first time, I felt a flicker of something like peace. I'd survived the worst. Maybe I could survive this too. The radio sat on the kitchen table for days, its box unopened. I couldn't bring myself to touch it, afraid of what it might mean or what it might not. Was it Daniel's way of reaching out? Or just another stranger's gesture? Like the casseroles and letters that kept arriving. The uncertainty gnawed at me. But life pressed on. The fundraiser had made me a reluctant local hero, and the community center asked me to speak at their next event. I agreed. Not for the attention, but because helping others gave me a reason to get up each morning. The event was packed, the room buzzing with faces I didn't know. I stood at the podium, my hands gripping the edges, and told my story, not just the slap, but the years before, the sacrifices, the love, the slow drift between me and Daniel. I spoke about forgiveness, not because I'd mastered it, but because I was trying. We don't stop loving our kids, I said, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. Even when they hurt us. The applause was warm, but it didn't fill the emptiness. Afterward, a young woman approached me, her eyes nervous. Mr. Thompson, I knew Daniel, she said. Her name was Mia, a former co-worker. She told me he'd been spiraling even before the video missing deadlines, snapping at colleagues, living beyond his means. He talked about you sometimes, she said. Said you were the only one who ever believed in him. Her words were a knife, twisting in my chest. Why hadn't he told me that himself? Mia didn't know where he was now, only that he'd left the city after losing his job. He was ashamed, she said. Not just of the video, but of letting you down. I thanked her, my voice barely a whisper, and went home. That night, I finally opened the radio box. Inside was a note, not in Daniel's handwriting, but from a local church group. We heard your story. It read, keep the faith. I set the radio aside, disappointed but not surprised. It wasn't him. The next morning, I started volunteering at the community center, helping seniors navigate their bills and avoid eviction. It wasn't much, but it felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I met people who carried their own scars, parents estranged from their kids, widows living on memories. We didn't talk much about our pain, but we understood it. One woman, Clara, gave me a plant she'd grown from a cutting. It's tough, she said, smiling. Like you. I put it next to Daniel's trophy, a small reminder that life could still grow. Months passed, and the world forgot the video. My life settled into a quiet rhythm, volunteering, tending the plant, ignoring the ache that flared when I passed Daniel's old room. I stopped checking his number, stopped leaving the porch light on. But I kept his birthday card, tucked in a drawer with the photos. I wasn't ready to let go completely. One rainy afternoon, I was sorting donations at the center when my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Dad. It's me. Can we talk? My heart stopped. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. Was it really him? I typed back. Where are you? No reply. I waited, the rain drumming against the windows, each second stretching into eternity. I didn't know what he'd say, or if he'd even show up. But for the first time in months, I felt hope, fragile, uncertain, but real. The rain didn't stop, and neither did my waiting. I sat by the window, clutching my phone, checking it every few minutes for a reply that never came. The text, Dad. It's me. Can we talk? Burned in my mind, a flicker of hope that felt too fragile to trust. I wanted to believe Daniel was ready to face me, to face what he'd done, But doubt crept in. What if it was a mistake? A wrong number? Or worse, a cruel prank? I'd spent months rebuilding myself, piece by piece, and now one message threatened to unravel it all. 2 days later, he showed up. I was washing dishes when I heard the knock tentative. Unlike his old confident rap, I opened the door, and there he was, thinner than I remembered, his eyes hollow. He wore a worn jacket, nothing like the tailored suits he'd once flaunted. "Dad," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I stepped aside, letting him in. The apartment felt smaller with him in it, the air heavy with everything unsaid. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where he'd slapped me. The birthday card was still in the drawer, but I didn't bring it out. "I'm sorry," he said, staring at his hands. "For everything. I didn't mean to hurt you." His words were soft, but they carried weight, like he'd been carrying them for months. I waited, letting him fill the silence. He told me he'd left the city, taken a job at a warehouse in another state, living in a shared apartment with strangers. "It's not much," he said, "but it's honest." He didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't make excuses. He talked about the video, how it had stripped away his pride, his friends, his identity. "I thought I was better than you," he admitted, his voice breaking. "Better than this place. I was wrong." I listened, my heart torn between anger and relief. I wanted to yell, to ask why he'd let it come to this. But I saw the boy in him again, the one who'd once needed me to fix his world. "I never wanted you to lose everything," I said finally. "I just wanted you to see me." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "I see you now, Dad." We didn't hug, didn't erase the past, but we talked. For hours. We talked about the years we'd lost, the mistakes we'd both made, the love that hadn't died, even if it was bruised. He stayed for dinner, the first meal we'd shared in years. It was simple, just soup and bread, but it felt like a start. Daniel didn't move back in. He had his own path now, one he needed to walk alone. But he called every week, sometimes just to talk about the weather, sometimes to share a small victory, like saving enough for a used car. I kept volunteering, tending Clara's plant, living for myself in a way I hadn't before. The world had seen my pain, but it also saw my strength. I wasn't just the man in the video anymore. I was Henry Thompson, a father who'd loved, lost, and kept going. One evening, as I listened to the radio, the one from the church group, I found myself smiling. Daniel had sent a text, "Happy belated birthday, Dad. I'll do better next year." I believed him, not because he was perfect, but because we were both trying. And sometimes, that's enough.